episode 14 of 20, Assessing Learning in PBL. You said, well, Ryan, I thought this was an administrative binge podcast. That's right. But one of your big pieces of currency is to make sure that your learners are learning, right? You've got to have great community perception. So community partners are great for that. And you also need to pay attention to that state test score and know your numbers. So you want to be able to ask your teachers, like, how do you know that the 26 students in your class will be future ready or even state test ready? How do you know they've learned the standard that was taught? And sometimes what I would say in the classroom, look at my lesson plan, look at the engaging activities. I just did some awesome teaching, boss. They had to learn. Well, great, but great teaching does not necessarily mean that great learning has happened. So we must have assessment practices in place to know that our learners are mastering content and employability skills. How else will you know if PBL is working, right? Or anything else that you're doing? Like if you're taking all the time to build this vision, to train your teachers, to get them moving, you want to know if it's working. And if you don't have solid assessment practices, you don't know what's working or what's not working. Many teachers do not understand high quality assessment practices, and we just see that PBL is the way to bring in proper assessment. A lot of it has to do with the transparency that a lot of our teachers haven't had before. We've kind of been able to hide behind a textbook or blame the textbook in some way, or somebody put the standards in wrong. We blame a lot of things, but what PBL does super well is bring about transparency for students and for teachers, eventually for you. And what's great about that is you can see what's working or not working and you can fix it. So let's dive into assessment practices. Before we do, I'm going to give you a resource right off the bat. We published a book called Life's a Project by Andrew Larson. You can go to pblpress.com, go to pblpress.com, and you can get some free bonuses. But what Andrew does is he is a PBL mentor to many. And so he's an expert in PBL, but he's also an expert in assessment. And his chapter on assessment around the 6 A's, the chapter on assessment is top notch. I think it's the best that's out there. So when you really look at the theory of assessment within project-based learning, that's the book that you want to grab. It's called Life's a Project. You can get it on Amazon, or you can go to pblpress.com and you can get some free bonuses that go along with it. So grab that and let's jump into our episode today, because I believe every administrator can make sure assessments are effective with these 4 leadership moves. Leadership move number 1 is going to be prepared to have discussions about how assessments will start to shift. It's going to look a little bit different in a PBL environment, right? You're going to have some formative assessments. You're going to have some workshopping that's going on. You're going to have teachers that aren't used to really reteaching things, right? There are some classrooms where it's like, well, you got 60%, so sorry about you. I hope you catch up. And that's just how it's always been done. So that's how we've done it. But with PBL, we've got a different system for that. So now, if you got a 60%, we're going to give you another workshop on that. The next day, we're going to teach for 15 minutes. We're going to reassess and get you where you need to be. All the while, the other students in the class are working on their PBL unit, right? So now there's a way to actually differentiate. We've asked our teachers to differentiate, but a lot of times what happens is they end up teaching really just multiple classes within the same class period, right? And with PBL, you've got a system now that allows your teachers to really assess deeply what your learners have mastered or not mastered and make sure that they can reteach those things in some way so that they can get caught up and be where they need to be even before they move on. So that's leadership number 1, is there's going to be discussions about, hey, things are going to look different. Let's talk about that. Let's look at the PBL versus a project graphic and say, where are we going to assess? Where are we assessing now? How is it going to look different? Leadership move number 2, discuss how assessments should focus on content mastery and those 21st century skills or the employability skills. How does this impact your grading programs? Like, does it fit into your Skyward or whatever it is that you're using? It usually does, but it might take a little extra training. Like I know when I was in the classroom, we were assessing content, knowledge, agency, presentation, and collaboration. So you have these 4 different buckets for grades, which is really powerful because now, again, you're looking at that content bucket And it is purely about your power standards, right? And your standards. And if somebody brings in a box of Kleenex, that doesn't adjust their content grade at all. Or if they're really great at talking in class, but they don't actually know the content knowledge, it it still shows, right? So you can actually help those kids because the buckets are separated. And you can see who's collaborating and who's not, right? I always tell the story about Matt, who was not great at collaborating, and it showed up because he got an F in that. Now he got an A in my class overall, but he was missing some pieces, right? And it shows up when you start grading differently. And that's a discussion that could take a while. You're going to need to do some reading. I like Gusky's work on that, where you start looking at grading. What does that mean? In PBL Simplified, I've got a whole chapter on grading that you can go through that looks at PBL in grading and how you can separate out those buckets and how you can have these conversations. Because there are school-wide decisions and there's individual teacher decisions. And you've got to decide as a staff and as a leader where you're going to give some leeway and what that looks like for people. So discussing how assessments focus on content and then those employability skills. Like, how are you going to assess employability skills? Are you going to create your own rubrics? That's a whole process. It's a super helpful process, right? And as you get grade collaboration, it's rarely perfect, but grading it in some way allows you to teach collaboration and allows your learners to learn collaboration, which again is going to be one of those top 5 skills that our industry partners need. Right? That's what they want from our learners. So we need to make sure that we're equipping them with that. Leadership move number 3 is have conversations about group versus individual grading. It is the age-old question, right, of group work. Is, a parent comes in and says, well, my child failed because the group was awful, or my child did all the work, so how come these other kids get the same grade, right? That's a legitimate concern, and we know that as educators. We just haven't always had the wording and the knowledge to really address it. So we want to start having that conversation early, because most grades should be based on individual student work, right? So we want to equip our teachers to tease out the individual performance from even within a group endeavor. So even if they're in a group, we want to pull out the individual grade in there. And there's certainly ways to do that. You could move grading towards step 4, which is what I advocate in PBL Simplified. And you can grab that book again on Amazon, wherever books are sold. In that grading chapter, I'm going to advocate that the first 3 steps of the PBL process are done individually. And that's where a lot of your content grade is happening. Your quizzes, your tests, your reteaching, it's happening right in there. So then when mom comes in and says, hey, why did my kid fail? It's because he was in a bad group. Well, no, not actually. Actually, let's look at his individual tests. Yep, bombed. Quiz bombed. He had an opportunity to retake that, didn't. Right. And you can actually explain why each student gets that grade. And we should be able to explain that, both for the learner and the parents and for our own practice. So having that conversation about group grades versus individual grades and coming to some agreed upon norms for your staff is a big, big deal when you start moving to PBL. Leadership move number 4 is going to be understanding how assessment works in PBL. This helps administrators navigate conversations with parents. You're still going to get those questions from parents, right? Somebody's going to call, they're not going to like something. You obviously know that, but you need to be able to speak to the PBL process so that you know where it is that your teachers are giving assessments. And again, when you look at PBL versus a project, you're going to see traditional assessments are in there. Right? You can have a formative quiz or a summative test. You can have a unit test. Like, those things are still in there. You can still point to those things. Like, yes, the learning environment is changing. Yes, we're collaborating more. And at least 85% of your child's grade is 100% theirs. So whatever grade they have in language arts, that's the grade that they earned in language arts. And here's the other breakdown. Here's collaboration and presentation. Here's why we grade those things. Oh, okay. Right. A lot of parents just don't know. Right. So there's going to be a lot of re-education that happens here too, especially around grading and assessment. So those are 4 leadership moves that you'll need to dive deeper into, but it's being prepared to have the discussion of how assessments will shift. And Life's a Project's a great book on there. Anything by Thomas Gusky, I like. Having that conversation around, like, what does a 0 look like? Leadership move number 2 was discuss assessments and how they focus on content mastery and 21st century skills. You're not going to get the employability skill growth out of your learners that you're going to see in really great PBL environments unless you're grading those things, right? You get what you grade. Number three, or assess. You're going to have conversations around group versus individual grading. It's always a hot topic, but there are right and wrong answers there, and we need to talk about them. And then number four is that you need to understand how assessment works in PBL so that you can help your teachers understand it and that you can talk to parents about it. So we're going to keep all these things transparent when it comes to assessment for a lot of different reasons, right? Parents still want to see what that grade looks like on the report card. You want to make sure that your learners are learning. You want to see if PBL works in your environment, right? Is it being effective? Are you seeing those scores go up? Are you seeing employability skills go up? Are you seeing a higher community perception? You know, when you go to a Chamber of Commerce meeting or a Rotary meeting, are people talking about your school? Keep all those assessment ideas, those testimonials, all those different ways that you're assessing things. You've got to have some kind of a system to collect it to see what's working and what needs help. Your call to action is, this is a bigger one now. If you're ready, like you've made it through 14 of these episodes, you are making it through. If you're ready to launch your PBL vision and you want to make sure that it sticks, there's really just no better way in the country to launch than through design days. We take you to a model school to inspire and galvanize your leadership team, not just you, your leadership team, around a shared vision. And then we do a 3-day level 1 workshop with your teachers. There's no better way. We launched, this is what Dixie's done. Southport did it. Southside Elementary did it. All Title I elementaries. This is the best way to launch. You do a 2-day leadership design days at a model school. So your leadership team's on board. You have a 3-year plan now that you can fully communicate. And not just you, but the teachers and coaches and APs that are on your leadership team, they can communicate it too. So now the rest of the staff understands the vision. They go into a training, and now you're firing on all cylinders. Every single one of our national model schools has launched this way. You can do it too. You can schedule an interview via the link in the show notes to get on our calendar. We will fill up our schedule for the summer, and we don't take every school. Like, you do have to be the right fit. If you say, hey, I think we can get this in one day, you probably don't fully see the vision. But if you've made it this far, I'm guessing you do see the vision. So let's get together. Let's talk about what your vision looks like and how we can bring it to reality. In the next episode, we are going to move towards that faculty collaboration, because effective assessments can change the intentionality of your staff, and it moves everybody towards excellence, especially this transparency piece. So you're building that culture of transparency and accountability. How do you involve your teachers in this process? Instead of just doing it to them, how can they be a part of it? So check out the next episode where we talk about faculty collaboration.